The interior defensive linemen, there are a load of good defensive linemen in the NFL, and it's no exception when it comes to the free agents, right? There are a good top 10, and then past that, there's a good top 20. There's a good top 30. There's 30 players that can play in the free agency. So if you're looking for an interior defensive lineman, there should be at least a role player for your team to sign out there that might fit their scheme. So, interior defensive lineman. Let's start off with Leonard Williams. And you may notice that I have J.J. Watt as an interior defensive lineman. And that is because J.J. Watt, I think, will be moving inside to the next team he plays. Leonard Williams was unbelievable this year. People don't realize how good he was. I think he led the NFL in quarterback hits, but I might be wrong about that. He also had double-digit sacks. Of course, people will make fun of me because I voted him to the Pro Bowl, but I did because I think he's awesome. And he's the best player on the Giants defense, I would argue. And it was the only real good pass rusher there. So he did it basically on his own. So if he were to sign elsewhere with another good edge rusher, he would be just as good, if not better. And if he goes back to the Giants and they sign an edge rusher with him, then you're talking about a really good pass rush. But he's young still. He's only like 26, I think. Then you have J.J. Watt, who I still think can play. He could play interior. He could play edge. But I think he's going to play more interior for the next team he plays. Really good pass rusher when he plays inside. Actually, this is something that's interesting that PFF brought up, that he's actually a lot more productive as an interior pass rusher than as an edge pass rusher because he doesn't have the speed he used to have. He doesn't have the quickness he used to have. But that quickness and speed that might not be good on the edge is actually a lot better on the inside. So keep that in mind when the next team signs him. Think about where he might play, and that will allow you to analyze how good he might be. But I think Watt can still be an elite player, and I think he'll be a good investment for the next 2 years, maybe next 3 years. But he actually played like the most snaps he's played this year than a long time. And I think that wore on him a little, but I expect those snaps to go down. But it's good to see that he's actually kind of healthy now. Shelby Harris is a really awesome player who's better pass rusher, I think, than run defender, despite his huge size. The guy's huge, but he is a good player and doesn't play a lot of snaps. He plays less snaps than a lot of top-tier defensive linemen, which I kind of downgrade him for. But he is a really, really good player when he gets in there, productive pass rusher, and probably worth the investment more so than a strict run defender like Dalvin Tomlinson, who's more of a run defender as opposed to a pass rusher. That's why I value Shelby Harris over him. Both are similar age. Both are kind of young. Both are like in their prime. So I think Tomlinson is more of like a number 2, number 3, like good defensive lineman. Well, I feel like Shelby Harris is like a really good number 2 and like a probable number 1 interior pass rusher for a lot of teams. So that's the way I look at those two. They're probably close. But Sue, I think, is better than Tomlinson. But I think Sue might be better than Harris. But Sue is old, and I think he's always been a weird free agent. Like, he's always been a guy that he's kind of been like a mercenary for hire. Like, whoever wants to sign him for a 1 year, like $7-8 million contract will get his services. I think of Sue like I think of like Deadshot from, Batman, I guess. Like, that's the way I think of Ndamukong Suh. So whenever you think of Sue, think of a mercenary, all right? But he's still an amazing player. The incredible thing about Ndamukong Suh is he's a great run defender. He's also a very good pass rusher. He had the most sacks he's had in like 3 or 4 years. And he played more snaps than any other interior defensive lineman this year because Vita Vea was hurt. So he can still play, guys. He's actually very, very good. So that's Sue. Then you have number 6, who I have Puna Ford. Puna Ford had a really good year this year for Seattle, but this is really his only good year, so it's a little concerning, but he's young. He's coming into his own. Good all-around player. Big body. I think can play in a lot of different systems. But I think Seattle will probably re-sign him. Sheldon Rankin's number 7. Didn't have his best year this year. That might be a trend moving forward. He might be regressing, is what I'm trying to say. But he could also at the same time get better and get back to himself if he gains better health, but he's a better run defender than a pass rusher, so I wouldn't be willing to spend too much money on Sheldon Rankin, although he's a solid player. Dietrich Wise is underrated. Dietrich Wise is a Patriot that has been one of their better, probably their best pure interior rusher. And I don't think is in a, honestly, I think the system he's in New England is like a bad fit for him. I think if Dietrich Wise were in a system where he played more of a pass rush role as an interior lineman and like was just like go after the quarterback, I think he would be a guy that could have 7 to 8 sacks a year. But I think because he plays in New England where they don't ask you to pass rush as much, he doesn't really put those numbers up, so people don't really know who he is. Still creates pressure and still, when he's in there is productive. But for New England, he's more of a role player, and I think with other teams, he'd be more of a starting caliber, like, good player. Then you have Robertson Harris, who I think is super underrated all around. Really awesome run stuffer. Huge dude. He is very unique in terms of his profile, his size overall, and I think can dominate certain matchups and certain games. And I don't think gets enough credit because, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, all these guys in Chicago didn't get to play and start the whole year this year, but he could really go somewhere else and be like a really good player. Maybe similarly to the way that Akeem Hicks went to Chicago and became a really good player. I could see that with Robertson Harris. I could definitely see that. And then number 10, Lawrence Guy. I just think Lawrence Guy is a very reliable veteran, smart player, tough, good run defender, not a great pass rusher, but solid starter. So there's a lot of the Lawrence Guy type of dudes. Let's take a look at the defensive line players that I feel are undervalued and probably buyer beware. So Dietrich Wise is my probably number one undervalued, just because I see Dietrich Wise as, again, new system, better Dietrich Wise. F.A. Obada is a guy from Carolina who has a really nice story, a nice background, and I think is a good productive pass rusher. Played a lot on 3-man lines with Carolina and put up some decent sack numbers, some decent pass rush productivity. I think he's a kind of, nobody really knows who he is, but I think he's a good role player. Morgan Fox is a good role player as well. Played beside Aaron Donald. And when he played, played pretty well. Even in moments, when Aaron Donald there in Seattle, Morgan Fox was awesome. So good all around, but he's more of like a number 2, like low end number 2, like high end number 3, like rotation rusher. Buyer beware, JJ Watt, just because of his injury history and because of his name. Don't pay JJ Watt for his past, pay JJ Watt for his future. Mike Daniels, same thing. Mike Daniels hasn't been good the last 2 years, and I don't know if he'll ever be good again, to be honest. And the thing with Mike Daniels is he's old, and it just feels like he's kind of like semi-retired. I don't want to be like mean or anything, but like it feels like the guy, I see him on NFL Network all the time. Like he just feels like a guy that he's not still in his prime. He feels like he knows the door is closing on him. So that's Mike Daniels. And that is the defensive line position. Now let's move to the big edge rushers that everybody wants to talk about. That's the big position that everyone loves to talk about on defense. The pass rushers, the sacks, the strip fumbles, the big plays, the big difference makers on defense, right? There are a lot. And when I say a lot of them, this might be the best position in the NFL, period. This position is loaded, okay? There are 10 guys here who are like borderline number 1 pass rushers, and there are like 20 other guys that are going to play this year for a team as number 2s, number 3s, or just overall, rotation guys. And the edge market is one that I always look at for the veterans and for the guys that could be switching systems, that could maybe burst onto the scene that we saw this year with some of the guys that are heading into free agency, like Reddick and Floyd, for example, even to some degree Accora, which we'll talk about These guys are all top 10. Let's take a look. So, my top 10 free agent edge rushers. Now, again, edge rush is a very hard position to analyze. It's also a very hard position to rank because there are so many different edge rusher types and there are so many likes and dislikes that you could possibly have at the position. And there's so many different schemes, right? That makes it very hard to analyze. Like a Hassan Reddick can't play like a, let's say, Jadeveon Clowney. You know, like they're totally different players. Shaq Barrett is not like Hassan Reddick, or I guess that's kind of a similar one. You know what I'm trying to say though. Bud Dupree is a different player. He's more of a stand-up guy, and Carl Lawson is more of a hand-in-the-dirt guy. So that's just the way you look at edge rush. So number one, Shaq Barrett, by far the best edge rusher. It's not even particularly close. I think Shaq Barrett is the 4th or 5th best edge rusher in the NFL. He was the best in the playoffs and arguably, should have been the Super Bowl MVP. He is a difference maker, a huge difference maker. And the thing with Shaq is he doesn't really have a flaw either. He's one of those few edge rushers that can rush the passer, can drop into coverage, and can also defend the run. And I think he'll remain in Tampa, but if another team tries to give him a lot of money, he might be enticed to go there. Carl Lawson is a guy that I've liked a lot for a long time. He's young still, he's entering his prime, and he just had his best season of his career. He put up a lot of pressures, a lot of disruption, and it goes unnoticed because he plays in Cincinnati, but he is really athletically gifted, quick, strong, all of it, and I think could have a big year wherever he goes. I think, if he goes, he is a number one pass rusher to me. He is risky a little because he's coming off a huge year, but I think he's less risky than some of these other guys, right? I think Bud Dupree is risky, even though he's been more productive than like Hendrickson or even Lawson. He's risky because injury, first off, and secondly, he's on a loaded defense with a loaded defensive line. So that makes you always wonder. Trey Hendrickson is risky because he just had one amazing year, but it was an amazing year. Like his pass rush productivity was like top 5, pressures top 5, sacks top 5, all of it. So Hendrickson was incredible as a pass rusher, but he's very one-dimensional, and that is something that you have to take into account. But if you want to be one-dimensional, it should be as a pass rusher. It shouldn't be as a run defender. So that's why I have Hendrickson and Ngakoue and even Reddick over a guy like Clowney. Clowney is like a better run defender than a pass rusher, but I don't care about the run. I care about the pass. So I want the guy that can get after the quarterback, and that's Hendrickson, who I think is at number 4 because while some people might question him, I look at what he was supposed to be out of the draft. It just took him a little bit longer to get there. And I think what we saw last year is closer to what he'll actually be in his career than what we saw, 2 years ago. Yannick Ngakoue has been very productive the last 3-4 years. I don't think he's an elite edge player, but he's like a top 20, top 30 good player, causes strip sacks quarterbacks, creates pressure on his own without having to scheme, which I think is the difference between him and Matthew Judon. Number 6, Hassan Reddick. I have my questions about 1 year of amazing productivity, but he is athletic. He's a former first-round pick. He switched positions a little, so that helped him, and I think that helps his, if you put him in the right spot, now maybe teams know where to play him. Maybe he's a value to some teams, potentially. Jadeveon Clowney, okay, this is just me. I need to turn the camera on for this one. Jadeveon Clowney, okay, guys, you got to understand. Jadeveon Clowney lasted so long last offseason because he doesn't practice, he has an injury history, and he's not a great pass rusher. So you're asking to sign a guy that even though, he's been a PFF ranked top 20 the last 6 years in a row. He's been, one of the more well-known, productive players for the last decade almost, right? Last 5 years, Jadeveon Clowney's been an awesome player. But the problem with Clowney is he's better at run defending than pass rushing. he's already been injured like 4 times. And he does not practice. His effort is like, from a lot of sources, just not there. So a lot of teams, because of those reasons, will simply cross him off their board. They're just going to say, Clowney, he can go there. We're not going to get him because he doesn't practice. So if he doesn't want to practice, he's not going to be on our team. Like, some teams are just like that, right? So you expect, you think like a guy like Bill Belichick is going to sign a guy that doesn't practice? I doubt that. So there's just certain guys like that, the name recognition might be better than I think the productivity right now. You look at number 8, Leonard Floyd, who I think is a good player, but same thing with Dante Fowler last year. Like, maybe he was more productive than he is actually good. I think Floyd's value is in that he can do a little of everything and be good at it, right? He can play edge, he can play linebacker, he can play the run, he can play the pass, he can do all of it a little and do it all well, but I don't think he's elite at any area. Number 9, Matthew Judon. I think Judon is good, Matt Judon, if he's in the right system. If he plays for Baltimore or Miami or a team like that, he'll be good. But if he plays in a team where they're just like, okay, we got 4-man rush and Judon, you got to get to the quarterback, I don't think he's that type of guy. I think he's more of a scheme guy. That's just my opinion. And then lastly, number 10, I have Romeo Accora, who's very interesting. Romeo Accora, this is what I'll say about him. Whenever he has been allowed to be a pass rusher, he's been very good. Now, the problem with Romeo Accora is that when you play in a system for Matt Patricia, you are not asked to be, just get to the quarterback. Just rush and just sack him. But what we saw with Romeo Accora was when he was allowed to be let free as a pass rusher, he put up double-digit sacks, right? So his pressures were there. His productivity was there. This wasn't just like a pure totals thing. He was very productive, efficient from his pass rush, which is something you need to look for. You don't just look at the totals like, oh, he got 10 sacks. Well, he had 1,000 rushes. Like, of course he had 10 sacks. No, he was a little bit of both. He's still young. He's entering his prime. And I think for like a team that is, 4-man rush, just let Accora and these guys get there, he'll be better than being in a team where he has to be, set the edge, be athletic and run around and contain the quarterback. No, just let him get to the quarterback. Like, that's what I think Romeo Accora is going to benefit from moving forward if he plays in that type of defense. And that's why I put him at number 10. I think there's other players that people would put at 10 or whatever, but I think because of his youth and because of that potential that is there, that is why I have him at number 10. So let's look at my undervalued and my buyer beware players. So Tyus Bowser is a player that I really like. I think actually out of all of the Ravens edge rushers, he was probably down the most efficient pure pass rusher of all of them. And I think if he gets more snaps, he would be a very productive player. He's good in a lot of facets of the game, but he's just not gotten a lot of snaps. I look at Alden Smith and I say, this guy, had a really good start to last year. And maybe I feel like he just played too many snaps. He was out of football for like 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it was, and then was expected to come back and be a team's number 1 pass rusher. Things don't happen like that, okay? But Alden Smith, I think, could go to a team and be a very productive number 2 pass rusher. Could be Dallas, actually. And, of course, Romeo Accora for the reasons I stated. Buyer beware Leonard Floyd, because Leonard Floyd played with Aaron Donald, and we saw the exact same thing happen with Dante Fowler. So just in my opinion, if you're expecting the same productivity out of Leonard Floyd you saw this year, you're probably going to be wrong. And Matt Judon, because of the reasons I stated, I feel like he's more of a product of Don Martindale than a product of Matt Judon. That's just my opinion, and I don't mean to slight Ravens fans or Judon himself, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. All right, let's move to the linebacker position. which I feel the linebacker position's actually been undervalued as of late. When you look at the Super Bowl and you look at the Super Bowl champs, with those two awesome linebackers, I think a lot of teams are going to look at linebacker this offseason and say, we need those guys. We need the speed. We need the athleticism. We need the coverage ability. We need the playmaking ability of Levante David and Devin White. And I think we might see that with a couple of these free agent linebackers here. So let's take a look at the linebacker free agents, where I think there's 3 really good players, one amazing player, 2 really good players, and then a lot of interesting players. I don't know how good they are, but they're interesting. So let's take a look. Number 1, of course, is Levante David, who I fully expect to go back to Tampa Bay. But if he does not, he's interesting because I think he instantly upgrades any defense he goes to from every single way you could. Coverage, run defense, leadership, experience, teammate, all of it. Levante David is arguably the best linebacker in the league. So getting him would be highly useful, especially for a team that lacks coverage or lacks just speed in the middle of the field. But he is getting older, so that is something to consider. Jayon Brown is somebody I've liked for the last 2 years a lot. I think he is highly versatile. He brings good blitzing ability, good coverage ability, good speed. He is a pass game player, and that's what I like. He's good versus the pass. Matt Milano I got a crush on this guy, borderline crush. Matt Milano is an incredible football player. He does not make mistakes. He has a very high football IQ. He is excellent coverage-wise, running backs or tight ends. He basically does anything that you want. He's not a blitzer, but he's a really solid tackler in open space. He's got good athleticism, and I just think he could play in any scheme as a middle linebacker. So Matt Milano's the guy that I feel I'm really interested to see how much money he's paid. Because, I don't know how teams value Matt Milano, but we'll see, I guess. KJ Wright's really good, but he's old, and he just had a really good year. I was actually surprised by how well KJ Wright played in 2020 because he is older, but he's still a good player, gets by a lot with his intelligence, which I think allows him to still play at a high level, which you do got a little bit concerned about. Denzel Perryman was really good once he became the full-time linebacker for the Chargers. Really, really stout player, strong, quick, fast, and really good in pursuit, I would say. Number 6, Nicholas Moreau, who had a breakout year for the Raiders. Played more as the number 2 or number 3 linebacker, but he's meant for that role. Decent in coverage, decent in run defense. He's a typical 4-3 linebacker. Pierre Lewis, I have at number 7 because of his coverage grade. He was very good in coverage this year and is a good athlete. I think could be utilized in a scheme that utilizes him kind of like a Devin White, a blitzer with his speed, and then maybe a little bit of a cover guy, man-on-man to tight ends and running backs. I could see him being successful in that role. At number 8, BJ Goodson, who had a really surprising year for Cleveland. And I think Cleveland will probably want him back. But he's just an overall good linebacker, still pretty young. Number 9, Devondre Campbell. Devondre Campbell has always intrigued me. I've always wanted to see Devondre Campbell in the New England defense because he reminds me a lot of Dante Hightower, but he's always been in an Atlanta-Seattle scheme, which I don't think he has the speed to be in that scheme. So I'd really like to see him move schemes because he is big and pretty fast for his size. I think if he did play in that, use him as a blitzer more and use him as a rusher kind of thing more, he might be better, but I don't know. But he's always been a name that athletically has jumped out at me as a good player. He's had really good seasons. He's had kind of average seasons. I think he's a solid number 2 linebacker. Let's move. Oh, and Eric Wilson. Eric Wilson's a very underrated player. Everyone talks about Anthony Barr. They talk about Eric Kendricks, but Eric Wilson had a really good year this year and could be on his way to getting a bigger contract to becoming the number 1 or number 2 linebacker elsewhere. That's what I would expect, at least. So the undervalued and the buyer beware linebackers. Matt Milano is undervalued, I think, because I don't think he's going to be paid like a Levante David, although he's much younger and kind of a similar player. I think Matt Milano would be maybe not as good, obviously, but like I think he would solve a lot of teams' inability to cover the middle of the field. And I think that's very important. It's undervalued. So is Matt Milano. Neville Hewitt played a lot of snaps as the number 1 linebacker for the Jets this year. Really good in run defense, really good in pursuit, solid in coverage. Young still, I think he would be a solid veteran signing. Eric Wilson, I just brought up, very productive playmaker. I think he had 3 picks, a forced fumble, and good athlete, can move, can cover. Malcolm Smith is my buyer beware because he just came off a really good year for him. He hasn't had a good year in a long time, and he just randomly had a good year with Cleveland, and I just don't expect that to happen again. He's like 33, 34 years old. I think he's getting too old. And KJ Wright, just because he's too old. I just think KJ Wright's old, so I probably wouldn't sign KJ Wright unless I was Seattle.